Good Wednesday morning, friends, or afternoon or evening, or whenever you happen to be joining. For those that I don't know, I'm Reverend Jennifer Finley, our Momentum and Discipleship Pastor here at First United Methodist Church in Kirksville, Missouri. And at least here, I can sit where I'm sitting in our gathering space in our church building. I can look out and see it flurrying and snowing and a little bit of snow accumulating on the ground. And I did not expect snow this morning. I don't know about you. That's why I turned the fire on. It felt like a good day to have a little bit of fire, a little bit of coziness as I joined you. This is our midweek time to simply pause in the swirling snow and the swirling weather and the things that swirl in our world, to pause together, to simply take a deep breath together and to wonder where we're sensing God at work in our world. And as I've been doing that for myself, I've been thinking about where we are right now. Many of us are preparing this week to head into Thanksgiving plans next week, to head into family gatherings. And then from there into the rush of the Christmas season. Here in the life of our church, we are preparing not only to head into a holiday week next week, but then to head immediately into our Advent season, the season where we prepare for the coming of Jesus. And there are deeply, beautifully held traditions of that time, both in the life of our faith community and in our own family lives. And that got me to wondering, how is God meeting us? Where are we sensing God at work in this particular season and this particular time? I'm finding for myself, at least, that we're also in a time where, while the pandemic is not over, it is certainly eased at ways in which we are more fully inhabiting in-person spaces, both in our own faith community, but also in our family lives, at the same time that we're thinking about the things that we added on, that we created together as families and individuals and faith communities during the pandemic, and things that we want to keep and be a part of future seasons. And with all of that swirling, I found myself in an interesting spot of excitement and also maybe a little bit of a grief, of thinking, what is this year going to be like? And is it going to be like it was last year or the year before, the two pandemic years? Or is it going to be like what it was in fall in November of 19 and Christmas of 19? Or is it going to be something entirely different? I've been thinking about that for myself in my own life, for my own family gatherings, and wondering what it's going to be like for us as a faith community. And so I thought we would maybe just wonder a little bit together. And I was thinking about that as I was wondering about, how does God meet me in all of that? I was reading a devotion, and the author of the devotion talked about family recipes. We began a worship series on Sunday where we talked about from generation to generation. We talked about the ways in which things are passed along from generation to generation and how God is in the midst of all of that. And this was a devotion about a family recipe. In this case, it was a vinaigrette. And the author writes, there are many versions of this dressing, including the simple olive oil and salt version, which Nana, my grandmother, dressed up our salads when she visited France in the autumn of 1999. Her first time there in the 1950s, when my mother was young, became the inspiration for many of the recipes that we then inherited. Perhaps this dressing is such a one. My memories of our salad dressing span decades and are drenched in joy. I love that phrase, drenched in joy. I was finally old enough to sit with the older cousins and adults. With 30 people surrounding the table, the salad was always dressed. It was my favorite part of the meal. The dressing would slide under the rice on my plate, creating a unique delicacy that I would recreate in my college dining hall as comfort foods years later. Sounds of laughter and repeated stories, feelings of love and warmth would flood back at the first taste. No one in my family makes the dressing just like anyone else. Every time it is a little bit different for everyone. She goes on to share the actual recipe, but it was that last line that caught me. No one in my family makes the dressing just like anyone else. Every time it is a little bit different for everyone. And she acknowledges that the written recipe is only a snapshot in time. And that got me to thinking about family recipes and some of my own experiences. In my own family for Thanksgiving, we make a mixture, a cornbread stuffing. That's both cornbread and biscuits. There's nothing sacred about this recipe. I imagine it actually probably came from the back of a biscuit can at some point, but it was what my grandmother made. And so we make it every year. But there was one year, probably more than 1 year, but 1 year I can remember, where we made the stuffing and something was just a little bit different. I don't know if we used just slightly different seasonings or if we used a slightly different brand of biscuits or what exactly had happened. But it didn't quite taste the same. It was still good, but it wasn't exactly the same. And we didn't choose to recreate that particular version later for another year, but we were okay in the midst. We did acknowledge, this tastes different than it sometimes does each year. And then I got to thinking about a family fudge recipe. My grandmother, when she was living, would make the fudge. Now, this was not a sacred recipe. I think it was what I heard, the story I heard told was it was the $1 million fudge recipe that Mamie Eisenhower liked to make and publicized. But I grew up learning to make this fudge. And I distinctly remember the year when my grandmother was there with us, but no longer able to really stir as hard as needed. And she bequeathed the bowl and the spoon that she used to my dad and I, her son, to continue the tradition, to make the fudge. And of course, she was watching as we did that, and the fudge turned out fine. And then I distinctly remember the first year that we made it on our own without her. And I don't think we did anything differently in the recipe. But it was different that year. The fudge maybe tasted the same, but it was different without her physically there. And I remember another year where my dad and I bought the nuts that go in this particular kind of fudge, and it was still really good, but it didn't quite taste the same, and I couldn't quite figure out why until I realized that Grandma had used a different type of walnut, that she had used black walnuts, and that was the taste that I was used to associating with fudge. As I was thinking about all of these family recipe stories, and I imagine you have your own as we're moving into this holiday season, I was thinking, this phrase came to mind, and it has been a refrain for me this week, and it's one that where God has met me, and I thought I would maybe offer it to us. It's not going to be the same as it was before. And that's okay. Now, that's easy to say about recipes, right? We're not going to make it exactly the same way every single year, and that's okay. But I'm wondering for myself, God is meeting me in this phrase for all kinds of ways and things. Our Thanksgiving gatherings aren't going to be exactly the same as they were during pandemic years, and that's okay, maybe good. They're not going to be exactly the same as they were in the fall of 19, and that's okay, and God can meet us there. But I'm also wondering about our holidays, our Advent season, our Christmas season, and maybe just some of those intangible things that we're wondering what feels different this year. God's meeting me in this sense of it's not going to be the same, exactly the same as it was before. And that's okay. God has met me in that phrase, I think, in part because it's not simply okay, it's freeing. When we say, it's not going to be the same. We're not saying that it's going to be good or bad. We're acknowledging that there's going to be a mixture of grief and joy, and that God is going to meet us in that mixture, in that complicated mixture, which is probably true every year. And so, friends, as you head into this season, as you move in through this November season and into whatever next week might hold for you and whatever the weeks beyond hold, my hope and prayer for myself and for all of us is that God continues to meet us in this concept and this thought. It doesn't have to be the same as it has been before. To be truly good and truly holy, God is with us every single step of the way as we're making those family recipes, and as maybe our recipe for our holiday season involves a new kind of mixture of joy and grief and all the things in between. for God really truly is with us and meets us there. Go in peace, my friends.